wondering how I got into this mix.
So our next speaker is a dear friend of mine that I'm just really getting to know, but his name is Derrick Broze, and he's an anarchist, and I guess we all are, aren't we? In some way, you know. And I think the key and kind of like the theme of what we really want to be thinking about is we want to question everything. We want to stop accepting the way things just the way things are. Like, we've been delivered a really messed up reality, and we just accept it in most cases. Like, we accept a pharmaceutical industrial complex that sucks. We accept an agricultural reality that's stupid. We eat food that has toxic chemicals. We drink water that has chlorine in it. You know, and we just keep moving, and we just accept it. Well, I think it's time that we all start radically questioning it and together start coming up with solutions. And I know that Derrick Broze is one of these guys that just freaking radically questions everything and will not endure. So let's give a huge round of applause for my brother, Derrick Broze. So glad you're here, bro.
What's up, everyone? How you guys doing this morning? It's still morning, right? I'm going to be talking for about an hour, I think I have here, and I have a mailing list. I usually forget to do this, so I'm saying this now before I forget. But if you're interested in anything I say, I have an email list and a text list. If you ever want to get like text updates, email updates every time I release a new article or mini documentary, or when I'm doing speaking events, you can come get that. But before I get started and go any further, we need to start the way I always start because it's important for me to connect with you guys on this level. So if you can hear my voice, please take a deep breath with me. And when you release that breath, let's take a nice big howl, whatever noise. I prefer howling. Let's take a breath. Getting people to howl all over the world is one of my dreams come true. Thank you, brother. So as Stephen said, well, first off, I mean, even the fact that I'm here is just synchronicity. I met Stephen about maybe less than 6 months ago. Just universe brought us together, and we've been working together. I've got to go to Punta Mona. Who here has been to Punta Mona? Anybody here? Yes. If not, you need to go get to Punta Mona. I'm going back as soon as I can. But Stephen blessed me and let me come experience that for my birthday back in December, and we've just been forming a great partnership and friendship since then. But my talk today, I've talked a couple times around here. This is my full presentation, so if you heard me talk the past couple days and heard a little bit of what I've talked about today, we're going to go more in depth. And I think I called this one Holistic Activism and Freedom Cells, Creating Conscious Communities, or the Keys to Conscious Communities, something like that. And as Stephen said, I am an anarchist. I mentioned this the other day. And you know, part of my message in speaking, particularly to this audience, because a lot of times I speak to audiences that are already full of anarchists and understand what that language means. And I realize that there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation in our world in general, and it's by design. But before we go any further, since Stephen has put me out there as an anarchist, I just want to define that for those who might be unaware. For one, it's a political philosophy, a historical political philosophy that has many different schools, just like any philosophical school. It's been around for about 200 plus years, but I think on a more intrinsic, instinctive level, the idea of anarchism, of having no central authority over us, has been around forever. You know, and people have, I think we naturally, in our most natural state, don't want to have another person telling us how we should dress, what we should eat, who we should date, you know, how we should live our lives in general. So when it comes down to it, when you break down anarchy and arc without rulers, that's what it means. It doesn't mean there won't be rules, that we can't form communities where we have guidelines and norms and customs that we all follow. In fact, it's the exact opposite. If we could just establish a few ground rules and get everybody to recognize that we are all free, beautiful, powerful human beings that own ourselves. We own ourselves and, you know, the products of our labor and the things that we create. The implications of that mean that so does everyone else own themselves. And so when you understand that, wow, I own myself. Nobody should be able to tell me how to live my life and force me to do things I don't want to do. We can come to agreements, we can have debates and discussions, and maybe we can exchange viewpoints and come to understand each other better. But it's immoral, it's wrong, unethical, impractical to force other people to live the way you want. So if you recognize that, and you recognize that other people have that right, then in some form or another, whether or not you want to wear the label, you are an anarchist. And obviously, it goes further into the idea, because once you recognize that, then you look at all the different institutions that surround us, government, corporate power, different systems of centralized authority, and you recognize that they're not really serving the people. They're not serving the health and the wealth of our communities, is how I like to put it. So just to get that definition out there. So next time you see something like The Purge 2, Anarchy, or somebody's like, look at that anarchy in the streets, and they're really describing chaos, maybe you can help us out and give them a little bit of education on that. It's not accurate. And as I said, I think it's done by design so people won't look into the philosophy that rejects all forms of centralized power and says that people should be free to rule their own lives. And, we can have conversations about that later, but I just want to establish that. And I consider myself to be what I call a holistic anarchist. This is something I've been creating and building over the last couple years. My website's theconsciousresistance.com. That's sort of the name I've been using for this movement or whatever you want to call it. But more recently, I've been refining it and defining it as holistic anarchism, holistic activism. And that's what we're going to talk about first. I talked about this briefly the other day. We're going to go more in depth. And then I'm going to talk about something called freedom cells, which if you were here yesterday when we did a panel on permaculture, I briefly mentioned it. We're going to go into that. So this talk, I will be name-dropping like websites and tools and different things. Feel free to take notes or come up to me and ask me afterwards because there's a lot to get out here, and an hour is really not enough. So holistic. This term, I find, is thrown around very often in these type of events, spiritual communities, conscious communities, meditation communities. Most people are familiar with the term holistic medicine. I know there's been some talks here about holistic sexuality, and just, the word can be applied in a number of different ways. But who here actually understands what the term holistic means and where it comes from? It comes from the philosophy that is known as holism. Holism is the philosophy that we should look at a situation or study, an environment, whatever you're looking at, as a whole, as one whole, rather than breaking it down into individual pieces. So let me explain that. So when it comes to holistic medicine, the term that most of us are familiar with, what that means is you're looking at the whole body, right? As opposed to allopathic or Western medicine where you're just treating the symptom. So you look at the whole body and try to find the root of the cause. When it comes to holistic ecology is the study of the environment and our species as one entity rather than separating us from the environment. And when you do that, it really has some powerful implications in the results that you get. There's also holistic psychology, again, looking at the whole mind and trying to see what answers you can come to through that. And there are plenty of other examples, but that's what it's really about. Holism, the philosophy of looking at the whole systems rather than just focusing on the small individual parts. Doesn't mean that the individual parts aren't important. I'm a strident individualist who believes that if we all claim our power as individuals and then recognize that power in other people, we can also build collectively. But I don't believe in giving up the individual for the collective. So what is holistic activism then? Now, activism is another interesting word because typically I find when we think of or hear the word activism, we're thinking of people in the streets holding signs or rallies and marches, protest movements. That's the sort of idea that's been put in our head of what an activist is. I did my time in the streets, and if there's a reason to go out there and confront power, I'll be out there with you guys again. But being an activist is much more than that. I mean, for me, what I found is it's the way that we live our everyday lives. It's the conversations that we have. I like to say that the revolution or the evolution is in the conversations because it's just as important the way you communicate with your spouse, with yourself, with your friends, your family, as it is to recognize the various systems of power and control that are limiting our freedom and destroying the planet and things of that sort. As activists, I find that it's very easy for us to identify the problems. You watch a documentary, you have some conversation, something happens that triggers you to start rethinking everything you've ever been taught, right? And you just go down the rabbit holes. Maybe you're watching YouTube documentaries all night. You're going down there, right? You start to rethink everything that you've been told, and after a while, you start to identify the people and places and institutions that you consider to be responsible for this. So you're like, okay, it's the it's the bankers, or it's the rich, wealthy elite, or it's the Bilderbergers, or it's the deep state, or it's the Illuminati, or whatever names you want to give to these various entities, right? So that's the easy part. Recognizing the problems and then pointing fingers. Like that doesn't really take a lot of work. And then from there, we go to the streets and we confront and we say, these are the people that we don't want in charge. Like, please get rid of them. Somebody hold them accountable. And I found that a lot of activists stop there. They just stay in that phase, sort of maybe angry, just looking externally. We'll just say that, looking externally at the problems. But to be a holistic activist means, again, looking at the whole system, right? So you identify a problem. Somebody throw out a problem or an issue that concerns them. Anybody? Any issues? You guys are all okay with the world as it is right now? Everything's good? All right. Say it. Say it. I couldn't hear you, bro. Drug prohibition. Okay, the drug war, right? I don't like to use the word victim, but I participated in the drug war. I went to prison in 2005. I was addicted to crystal meth and spent 18 months in prison. I got arrested the week before I turned 20. And when I got out in 2008, I got to experience life as a felon with this new label on me, this new X on my back, and see how people treat me differently. So it's definitely something that I care about. The drug war, there's plenty of good people, good people locked up in cages right now in the United States and other parts of the world for possessing a plant or doing something wrong that, again, the state, the entity of government, doesn't respect your self-ownership. They think they know what's best for you, what you should eat or ingest or smoke or whatever. They don't believe that you own yourself. Essentially, they're saying they own you if they can set the parameters for you. So the drug war, right? Again, easy to just point at the government, point at the corporations. Oh, they're manipulating the cannabis markets. They're locking people up and all those things. That's important. We need to recognize that information. I read a book, one of the first books that woke me up related to the drug war after I got out of prison. It's called Cannabis, A History. I highly recommend it. It's the first book I ever voluntarily took notes on because I was just that enthralled with it. And I was getting out of prison too, so it was kind of like, whoa, I just been through this. So yeah, we can identify the problems, but what does it mean to look at the drug war holistically, right? I think to be a holistic activist means not only to look at the problems, but then to stop and ask yourself, how am I contributing to this problem? How am I supporting this system? To me, the most obvious and sometimes the most difficult, although there are easier and easier ways to escape this, the most obvious way that most of us support the problems that we are against is through taxation. Because if you've ever tried to stop paying taxes, I haven't filed in 8 years now. We'll see how long I can go. If you have ever tried to stop paying taxes because you want to protest the war, or you want to protest the drug war or whatever, eventually, in the United States at least, and elsewhere, they all have their agencies. In the United States, it's the IRS. Eventually, they'll send the IRS after you, and what'll they do? They'll either come put you in a cage, or they'll garnish your wages until you're basically broke, right? They're going to get what they want from you because they believe they own you again. But through that taxation system, we're funding this whole machine. We're funding the drug war, right? I would even say, well, I'll stay away from that. So that's one example, I think, of how we are participating in the problems. Two other examples that I like to give that I think this audience might be familiar with. Who here participated in the March Against Monsanto anywhere in the world? It was very big. 2012 was the first big one. Yeah, shout out to that. Some friends of mine, Nick Burnaby of the Anti-Media and a couple other people were some of the founders of that, and we were very excited to see that go viral. And we had, I think, 500 cities all around the world the first year. And I was in Houston participating out there. And you have this just people just so excited to go out to the streets. In Houston, and I think this was representative of all around the world, you had like moms with their kids out there. You had a lot of first-time activists who'd never been on the streets coming out to hold a sign, to express their voice, and that's powerful. When you first get out there and you're like, wow, like I'm speaking out loud, this is an empowering step, right? And maybe you're networking with other activists and you're starting to form relationships. There's power in that. There's benefit to that. But what I noticed is after spending several hours marching around in circles and just following where the cops told them to go and waving at people and shouting, people are coming there because they're concerned about the bees, or concerned about the environment or the pesticides, or they're concerned with Monsanto's corporate relationship with the U.S. government, or whatever the issue is that brought them there. They came with good intentions. So then we're networking, we have our rally, and then when we leave, we're excited, and people go have a celebratory dinner or lunch afterwards, and they sit down and they're eating GMO corn chips, or they're eating food sprayed with pesticides. Again, not thinking holistically. You're serving the same institutions that you claim to oppose. Now, when I worked in Houston with this, the activist community that I'm a part of, the Houston Freethinkers, our role in this was to say, okay, after we hold the march, let's go to the last organic outpost, this huge urban farm in the poorest part of Houston. Let's all go there and let's do a workshop and actually learn how to grow our own food, because isn't that the real solution? To me, the solution isn't to beg the government to fix this for us. They're best friends with Monsanto. I don't know if you guys pay attention to the revolving door between Monsanto and the government. It doesn't matter who's president. It happened under Obama. It's happening under Trump. It's going to continue no matter what. So I don't find value in going and begging for the solutions and expecting them to listen to me. Instead, it's like, how can I take this problem into my own hands? How can I think holistically about it? So we said, after the march is over, let's all go to the urban farm. Let's do a workshop. Now, it probably wouldn't surprise you guys to know that of the 500 or so people who were at the march, we had less than a handful show up in the garden. And that's the problem. We can identify the problems easily. We can look at the people, the external factors, but are we actually willing to take the steps to get to the solutions? Because I'll tell you this, this is what I've dedicated my life to for the last 8 years, and I don't see any stopping anytime soon. And it's not easy. I get near burnout fairly often. Like, I can't do this anymore. I've gotten more balanced over time, just having to keep myself balanced between spreading information and taking care of myself. But it's not easy, and the solutions aren't easy. They're not as easy as just waiting every 4 years and going into a booth and pressing a button or voting. That's the easiest, simplest, and I think laziest way to try to be an activist or to care about the world. There's so much more empowering ways to do that. You can vote every single day with your actions, with your conversations, with the way you live as a human being. And yeah, it sounds sort of cliche or maybe trite, and people are like, well, the government's still going to exist. Yes, the government's still going to exist, but what happens if each of us recognize the power, the beauty that we have within ourselves, we start spreading that awareness, encouraging that in other people? It's going to spiral out. I've seen it in my own life and the other people that I've worked with. Other people get inspired. Other people get encouraged to follow their dreams and to follow their passions. And if we're thinking in that manner and we're thinking about the problems that we see and we start thinking, well, how am I contributing to this? I think we're going to be able to unravel them by pulling ourselves out from them. And that's my goal, is to get people to think holistically and to opt out of the systems that do not serve the health and the wealth of our communities. I'll give you one more example of a holistic, activist view. So who here knows what the Federal Reserve is in the United States? Central Bank of the United States? Okay, yeah. They manipulate the currency, economic enslavement, central banking, fiat currency, fractional reserve. Look these things up if you don't know. They work with the Wall Street bankers, of course, and together they form this entity that enslaves us via debt. Every time that you pay taxes, you're basically paying the interest on the loans that they loan to the bankers. So the people are basically, we're the tax cattle to keep paying these bankers. So as long as that system exists, they can print more money. Now they're not even printing it, it's just numbers on a screen to continue to fund wars, fund the surveillance state, fund this new beautiful wall they're building that's going to have facial recognition technology all up and down it. So the Federal Reserve, though, there was many people who started to oppose it around the same time as the March against Monsanto, about 2011, 2010, 11, 12, and I think it sort of tapered off at 2013. And there were these big rallies, just like the March against Monsanto, taking place all around the country at the 12 Federal Reserve banks and some of the smaller banks. And people are spending thousands of dollars to fly speakers out, renting stages, just doing a lot of effort, right? They're putting their time and energy in it. And I attended the first one in 2011, first one I ever went to. I think it was 2010 or 11. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. I'm meeting some people. This is awesome. Next year, right, they actually had me speak. The attendance was a little bit lower. Then by the third year that I was involved, the attendance had completely dropped off. Same thing with March Against Monsanto. These things don't sustain themselves. There's only so many times you can go march in the streets and go in a circle before you're like, hey, maybe there's a better way to do this. Or people just go back to being apathetic. They're just like, yeah, I got better things to do this weekend. But people were able to identify the problems. We have a rally, and the bank is right there, so they're giving these really rousing speeches like, that's the problem, we just need to take that building down, right? And the people over there are just like up on the balcony sipping their drinks and laughing at us, like literally like laughing at us, like, who are these idiots? And people understood the problem. This bank is manipulating the currency, economic enslavement. We need to audit it or end it, whatever solutions people are proposing. And they're all excited, they're networking, and they come over to some of the vendors in the booths, and they want to go over and buy an End the Fed shirt. And they come over, and what do? They pay with Federal Reserve notes, US dollars, right? Not thinking holistically. And I definitely understand it's difficult to get away from using the dollar or whatever colones or whatever your euros, whatever your currency of the state is. But because of cryptocurrency, because of alternative digital and paper currency, I've seen up in California and Humboldt County, they have the Humboldt Bucks, where they got different businesses in the community to accept them. And so you can go do the things you do, but without supporting the U.S. Federal Reserve System, without supporting the U.S. government and their war machine. So a holistic activist looks at the problems, identifies it, sees the people that are responsible. Okay, I know that. Okay, let me spread that information because information is important. If we don't spread these ideas, they won't grow. But if you only spread the information, if you're only focused on the problems, and I heard somebody say this yesterday, I was really glad to hear that we know the problems by now. And if you don't, there's plenty of good documentaries and books out there. Dedicate some time, spend some time away from people. I love reading and learning. Like, I'm kind of a hermit because other than doing these things, I just want to read all day long. That's what I just want to learn. And go spend some time learning, catching up on these things. And once you got caught up on who the people are and the histories of all this stuff, start thinking about the solutions. So when it comes to the Federal Reserve, the holistic solution would be stop using the Federal Reserve note at every single possibility. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're an artist, if you're a journalist, whatever it is that you create, that you do, accept Bitcoin, accept crypto, accept alternative currencies, barter with people, negotiate. You can enter into that marketplace and allow each of us here to have another option. What if every single person here, instead of taking dollars and colones, was only taking alternative currencies? We wouldn't be feeding into that system at all. And anyway, this whole thing could be built on creating an alternative. And I think we're going to get there. There's more and more opportunities for that. So those are just two examples of what holistic activism. Did I explain that well enough? You guys understand the holistic activist concept? Cool, okay, I'm going to move forward. Oh, and well, as I said, I'm an anarchist, right? So to me, being a holistic anarchist just means a lot of anarchists focus their energy, like a lot of activists, on just the state or the government, or just get bogged down in economic conversations about what they think the world's going to look like in some future that we're not at yet. So you get all this division among anarchists and activists trying to predict the future and predict what utopia they prefer. And because of that, they fight and divide each other further and further. I'm not interested in that. I have a vision, but I'm also here right now. And until we get to that place, then it's kind of useless to argue about what it's going to look like then. All I know is that right now we have a system that has inherent systematic violence and force that is predicated on the institution of government. And I think at the very best we can localize and decentralize and get back down to something that is more representative of our communities. I think we need secession from the system in many ways down to the neighborhood level. And that's where we're going to get into the next concept, something that is known as agorism. And I mentioned this yesterday briefly on the stage. This is, again, going to be more in detail. So the word agora, and I'm going to mention different concepts: holistic activism, agorism, freedom cells. I promise by the end they will be one nice picture that'll make a lot of sense. So agorism comes from the Greek word agora, which was the marketplace in ancient Athens. This is very similar to what we see here. People coming together. It was just this huge hub of activity where people are discussing political ideas. They're exchanging food and goods and all sorts of things. And there wasn't any Caesar or president or tax collector to tell them how to do that. There wasn't anybody taking a cut out of it. Basically, just to break it down very simply, agorism and counter-economics is what you see happening over here on the beach, right outside of the festival. I've talked to all the vendors out there. None of them are paying taxes. They don't have to pay taxes to be on the beach. Try to do that back in the United States. Somebody's going to ask you to get a permit for every little thing you do and to pay a fee, and that's going to, again, go back to these systems that either funnel the money out of our communities or they're building systems that don't represent the health and the wealth of our people. I don't pay taxes because I don't want to fund a war machine. I don't want to fund the surveillance state. I do want to help my community, so instead I keep that money in my hands and I go give money to survivors of human trafficking. I go give it to build fruit trees, build a food forest in Houston. I contribute to projects that I believe in and people that I can trust and that I can work side by side with, as opposed to trusting the centralized institution to know what's best for me and my hard-earned money, and you and your hard-earned money. But agorism, it's about that marketplace, right? This centralized hub of activity, people coming together, just free people exchanging ideas, exchanging goods, working together voluntarily, without force. So a man by the name of Samuel Konkin III, he was an activist in the 60s. He's since passed on, but he's the founder of the idea. He put out a couple of books in the late 70s and 80s about this. And basically what he envisioned was a time and a place that we could get back to this agora, this open marketplace where there wouldn't be force and violence in our exchanges, where we'd be free to just do as we please and interact, as long as, again, we're not violating our self-ownership and harming anybody. And so he had this vision, but he also had a plan of how we could potentially get there. And he called it counter-economics. And again, I think this is something that probably everybody here participates in some level or another. Counter-economics simply means, you have to think of this. He was coming up in the 60s, right? So you had the counterculture. He was trying to take some of the language, and so he called it the counter-economics. But essentially what it means is countering the state's economy. So anytime you deal with dollars or colones or euros or any of the state's money, you're dealing in what is known as the white market, the mainstream economy. That's the taxed market. There's a record of everything you're doing. They're very aware of your purchases. Anytime you deal with cash or digital untraceable money or barter or anything else that's under the table, as we like to put it, that's in the gray market or the black market. That is the counter economy. And what that means is you're doing exchanges, but there's no Uncle Sam or third party or IRS taking that money out of your exchanges. It's just two free people coming together. Hey, I'd like to buy your art from you. Cool. How much would you like? And we set a price. We agree on it. We decide a currency that's good for both of us. The exchange is made. There's no reason for a third party to be involved. That's the basis of counter economics. Now, counter-economics basically says, instead of choosing to use the white market, the mainstream economy, we should choose to opt out of that at every turn and use this gray and black markets. Now, when people hear black markets, sometimes I think they're thinking nefarious, sort of violent activity, mobsters or something. But again, in line with the idea of self-ownership and in not inflicting harm or violence on anybody else, this is all peaceful economic activity that the state considers to be either illicit or illegal. That means they would prefer you to have a permit for it. They would prefer you to have a license for it, or they just think it's illegal. So every time you're buying cannabis from your local dealer, you're participating in counter-economics. Now you can do it with the understanding that there's actually a strategy behind it, because the goal is to encourage as many people to opt out of the mainstream economy, to move towards the gray and the black market. So we start building this counter-economy. And encourage people to be entrepreneurs. So again, every single person here who is an artist in some form or another, with my books and all the things that I do, I barter, trade, accept anything other than, I will take the state's money if I have to, but I try to accept anything alternative to that. So both parties can know we're not participating in systems that we don't believe in. So Konkin said, we need to build a movement that would encourage people to opt out of these systems at every turn. And it's not just about the economic system. As I said earlier, being a holistic activist, you start looking at every area, right? Well, you don't like you don't like Monsanto and their products? Well, stop using Roundup. Stop buying from, grocery stores that are using traditional products that spray pesticides. Stop supporting those institutions. You want to create a better world? Start being a better person. Just start thinking in these terms of, instead of, what is somebody else going to do for me to solve this problem? Ask yourself, well, what am I doing? I'll give you another example. In Houston, we have these massive factories off the east end of Houston, all these refineries, because we're the energy capital or whatever. And there's a little town called Pasadena. Everybody calls it Stinkadena because it smells so bad because of all the chemical refineries. And everybody who drives by it hates it and complains, and it's not like a pretty sight to see. And I was with a friend, we were driving around, and she grew up around there, and she was complaining how much she hated those factories. And the more I started to think, I asked her, like, do you know what happens in there, like what they're doing exactly? And neither one of us could really name what that company was doing. We just know we didn't like the smell, and it looks ugly, and it's got all these giant clouds. So I encouraged her to do some research and find out, well, look and see what that company's doing. And maybe you're using their products without even using it, without even knowing it. Maybe you're using the plastic that they create in there, or the paper mill, or whatever it may be. And then you start to take steps. Okay, well, now I'm aware of that. I see a problem. I don't like this pollution. I don't like the smell. I don't like the destruction. This company is producing X, Y, and Z. I'm going to stop using X, Y, and Z. Or at least I'm going to work very, very diligently to limit my use of those products. So agorism and counter-economics and holistic activism, to me, they're all sort of part of the same strategy. And if you see, this is a symbol that my partner created. Each of these, to me, represent different areas of your life. Like, so you could think of this as like the economy, which would mean how you spend your money, like using your purchasing power. I think most people understand that, right? You don't like Walmart, don't shop at Walmart. But also the type of currency you use. So as I said, if you don't want to support the state, stop using their money. So you could have economy here. This could be food. Again, what kind of food you're putting in your body, the source of the food. Is that food coming from tens and thousands of miles away, supporting unsustainable food distribution and food production systems? Okay, well, if you recognize that, maybe start working on localized food production. Education, you start seeing, well, I'm being educated by the same people who are filling my head with propaganda. Why would I trust them to educate me? Why would I leave my education in their hands and then let them put me into thousands and thousands of dollars of debt in the process? We live in a beautifully decentralized technological age where we have the opportunity to educate ourselves without the need for these institutions. Has anybody heard of edx.org? EDX? Check that one out if you haven't. edx.org. I take free classes online, college-level classes taught by university professors from Harvard, Berkeley, et cetera, on and on. I've taken journalism classes. I've taken physics, astronomy. Pretty much, it's not some niche thing. These are all free classes that you can take. They're self-paced. They have video. It's an awesome system. And there's several other websites like that. There are so many opportunities here to educate ourselves without using these systems. How many people here have used YouTube to, figure out how to do something? Everybody, right? That's what we call YouTube University, okay? For some reason, we want to figure things out, and when we figure it out, we decide, hey, I want to film this and put this out for other people to figure it out. And that's the beauty of this decentralized nature, right? So we have opportunities. We can look at the economy, we can look at our food, we can look at education, and then it gets into what I think is probably the most important, our relationships, and again, how we communicate with people. I'm a big supporter of nonviolent communication. Has anybody heard of Marshall Rosenberg? Check out Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, a very, very helpful tool that I think could change all of our lives. It's just about being able to communicate with people in a compassionate manner, making sure that you understand what the other person's feeling, hearing what they need, what their requests are, being able to make simple requests and support each other. I mean, it can go a long way. and helping us. So our relationships, our communication, these things are just as important to me as understanding the nature of government and understanding the philosophies behind these ideas and understanding the economic systems, because there's definitely a need for that. And I think there's a lack of education when it comes to economics and philosophy and political philosophy in general. But we can't get stuck on those things alone. So with the agorist thing and with the agorist philosophy and mindset and counter-economics, as I said, the guys on the beach, they're all participating in it. They didn't ask for permission. The interesting thing, and this is sort of emblematic, I think, of what a world like could be without government. So I asked the guy on the beach, did anybody come make you pay taxes, any government or anything? He said, no, it's public out here on the beach where we can do whatever we want. But he did say that the locals who, this is their community, who live here, they came up and made sure that every single vendor basically paid sort of a fee to them. So it's not going to a government, but it's going to the local population. And I asked him, he basically said they walked up with machetes and were like, hey, everybody here has to pay a little bit. I mean, that's just the reality. Imagine if you have your own property, your own community out here, and somebody wants to come vend on your land, you might say, okay, cool, I'm fine with that, but give us $10 or something, right? That's essentially all they're doing. And since they don't have the backing of the police or some government, they want to have some mechanism to enforce that. And maybe it doesn't look very pretty to see people with machetes in their hands, but they want to make sure, I think, that their communities are getting the funding, right? Because I think all of us can generally agree, we don't want to be colonizers and come from elsewhere and come here and just enjoy this place and leave the people who live here, suffering or having to deal with it, right? We want to contribute and support the people. Show them love out there. I mean, seriously, they're just working hard. And they're budding entrepreneurs. And I'm going to give you an example of agorism in action and counter-economics in action, because it's not just philosophy, it's not just theory. The beautiful thing is Konkin wrote this in late 60s, early 70s, and he described 4 stages that he believed society would pass through as it progressed in this direction. And there we go, okay. He died in 2004, so he hadn't seen YouTube, social media, any of these things, but he was active on the internet, and he predicted in the 70s, like many people did, that technology was going to create a decentralizing factor in our lives. And just think about what we have now. I mean, apps alone, and obviously these are all tools, right? They can be used to distract, to harm us. The state and corporations are using technology to spy on us and monitor everything we do. But in the hands of free, beautiful people, it can be a tool to connect. It can be a tool to allow you to do ride sharing without any centralized institutions. It can create alternative cryptocurrencies. I mean, it can create decentralized education. There's so many ways that we can elevate ourselves. And so he predicted that this would happen, that technology would come along and would allow this process. And not only that, but the state would continue to be overbearing and increasing their interference in our lives. And I think looking around, there's not a single area of our life that I can think of that the state or their corporate partners are enmeshed in our lives, or at least attempting to get enmeshed in our lives. So some of his predictions have come true, and I think that's interesting. So he described this phase that he believed we would pass through, and I think that we're maybe at phase 2, early phase 2, where these ideas are spreading. What he predicted is that we would start to have pockets of free communities, or pockets of agoras, what I call conscious agoras, and there would be entrepreneurs coming together, organizing, and creating counter-economic activity. And what's happening is as more people are exiting the system and choosing alternative currencies, choosing alternative methods of organizing, we're going to see this mass exodus, because the people who are still ingrained in that system aren't just going to stand by and like, wow, look at all my friends. They're living a lot more freely. They're growing their own food. They're healthy. They're still living and thriving. They're not, because sometimes people think in order to opt out of the state, we got to go backwards and like live in a life of poverty or something. I think we can thrive and survive with that and opt out of these systems. We don't have to think about it as going backwards. Think about it as the next stage. We came to a point where we thought human beings needed to be ruled over and lorded over. And Josh, who was on the panel yesterday, he said something along the lines like, if all men were angels, then we wouldn't need a government. And I agree, right? But it's the fact that all people are not angels that is the very reason we shouldn't have them ruling over us. Because I consider myself to be a very freedom-minded person, but given the wrong circumstances, putting me in control of other people, I might become a tyrant. You might become a tyrant. I think that we all have that potential within us, no matter what we think we are. Give some people power, put them in that position where they think they're wiser than other people and they need to make decisions for other people. It creates some very dangerous circumstances. So I don't want to ever rule over anybody else or tell them how to live their lives. I want to promote and spread tools of decentralization, of opting out of these systems. And I believe agorism and counter-economics are a part of that. So the first step to participate in that, in the gray or the black market, You know, if you've ever had a yard sale, if you've gone to a garage sale and there's no taxes being exchanged, that's the gray market. If you've ever paid the neighbor to mow your lawn and there was no taxes involved, that's the gray market, right? Maybe you're still using the state's currency, you're still using the Federal Reserve note, but you're taking a step in that direction. This is what I call vertical and horizontal agorism. And I'll just mention this. I have 3 books on all the stuff I'm talking about. They're all available to download for free. I don't have any of them with me, but you can download them on my website. So if you're interested in these, they go much further into these concepts. But we can move vertically and horizontally from our current place where we are, the status quo, towards this place, towards the agora, towards the conscious communities that we're trying to create. And we do that in small steps, right? I opt out of paying taxes. I only use cryptocurrency. Pretty much, I'd say probably 80 to 90% of my interactions are all in alternative currencies or bartered. I still have to pay my landlord in cash, but he's almost there. And until that point, though, we can still take small steps. I know people hear these ideas and they're like, wow, this is a big concept. How would I ever get started? Just take those small steps. Start opting out of the systems that you don't support, right? Start supporting localized, decentralized food production systems. Because if we get to a point, which I think we will, where the shit hits the fan in some form or another, say government control, economic collapse, environmental destruction, if you are surrounded by a bunch of people who are dependent on these systems and have not learned skills to take care of themselves, it's going to be a very difficult time for you and for all of us. So my goal is to take these concepts and focus on localization. And that gets me to the next concept, which is called freedom cells. Where am I at on time? How long do I... 15 more minutes? Perfect. Cool. So freedom cells. This is the mechanism that I believe actually helps take the concepts I just talked about, agorism and counter-economics, and puts them into action. So check out Freedom Cells, that's CELLS.org, freedomcells.org. This is a digital social network. I don't really like to call it a social network because people tend to get images in their mind of people posting pictures of their cats or debating or food pics and stuff like that. I mean, you could do that if you want, but what its real purpose is, you go on to freedomcells.org, create an account. You can set your interests, your skill levels of different things, and it kind of gives you this little graph. You can search by skills and search by interest and find other people. It'll show you a map, and you can search 5 miles, 10 miles, 50 miles, and it'll show you all the people who've joined in your area. You can also create these cells. So the idea is that we're creating small decentralized groups, what I call freedom cells. When I started promoting this about 2 years ago, and the website's been up for about 1.5 years, we were contacted by people in New Zealand, Australia, Germany, all over the US who said, hey, we're working on something similar. We don't have a name for it yet. Or we call them circles, or we call them hubs, or there's a Salt Lake City Freedom Hive. Like it doesn't matter. The name is really not important. What matters is the concept. So the website can help you actually build these cells and people can find you and join. But the goal is that we foster real world interaction, right? So it's not just like go join the website and stop there. Join the website, search, find people, and set up a meetup or something and start thinking about how you can start organizing. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we use this in Houston, and you can take this as you will. These are not meant to be, this is what freedom cells are supposed to do. These are just the concepts that we have employed. So you start with, the goal would be to have 7 to 8 people in your group. And the reason for this is when you have only a couple of people, it's kind of difficult to get bigger projects done. When you start to have too many people, it starts to get, the effectiveness tapers off a little bit. It becomes a little bit more difficult to actually manage that. So we are aiming for about 7 to 8 people, but you don't have to wait till you have 7 to 8 people to get started. But in our community in Houston, we deal with weather things like hurricanes. We had a hurricane hit this last fall, last summer, and it was pretty difficult. That happens fairly often, right? So for us, we want to have 3 months worth of backup supply of food. Now, when I start talking about this, people are like, oh no, these guys are preppers, doomsday preppers, here we go. They're worried about the zombie apocalypse. No, I think it's just a wise decision to be prepared because all of our ancestors survived and got us here by being prepared for the next season, for the winter. My grandmother, who's in her early 80s and still very active, she's probably out in her garden right now, she's grown up on farms, taking care of herself, growing her own food. And every week, she goes to the garden, harvests what she can, takes it inside, pulls out her pressure canner, cans a bunch of vegetables, takes it down to the cellar and puts it away. You don't have to think about being some crazy prepper waiting for, the zombie apocalypse to hit, to just be smart. Because as I said before, if something goes wrong, economic, environmental, whatever, and you don't even have any you don't got a day's worth of food, it's going to be kind of difficult to to help other people, let alone help yourself. My goal is to be proactive rather than reactive and build these localized cells so that not only can we help ourselves and stay alive and support ourselves, but we can support other people and help other people and come to our neighbors who maybe didn't prepare it so much and say, here's some seeds, here's some tools, help yourself. Don't go looking to the state for answers. So our goal was to get everybody in our group to have 3 months worth of backup supply of food. We wanted everybody to have an emergency bag, again, sometimes a bug out bag, but for practical purposes. We also wanted to make sure that everybody in our group had some level of self-defense. Now for your group, you might be comfortable with firearms, so maybe everybody goes and takes a firearm training class, or maybe you just go take a self-defense class or do some jujitsu together, whatever. The goal is that the knowledge and the power within this group is diffused. It's not dependent on me or you or one single person. So if one person leaves or gets sick or whatever, the group is still strong. The group can still keep those things going. Maybe you want to make sure everybody in the group knows CPR, make sure everybody knows how to build a fire. So thinking from practical stuff to educational stuff, we wanted to make sure that everybody in our group was informed about permaculture. So we watched a couple permaculture documentaries together. We divided up the topic and said, you two take permaculture on land, you two take water, you two take this. We'll meet again in 2 weeks, teach each other everything that we learned. So the idea can be applied in any number of ways. I also went to Standing Rock, and actually, this is a really great example, too. I went to Standing Rock, and over there, it was divided up much like this. If you've seen the crew, there's like a kitchen crew, there's sound guys here, there's people who are handling the speakers, there's people who are handling the musicians. Everybody has their own little cells, almost, that are focused on their specific task, but they're also part of the larger network that is creating Envision. So they have a common goal, but independently, they're also strong. And so when I talk about the term cells, there's two reasons I chose that, because there's been, over the last 15 years or so, pretty much since 9/11, there's been a lot of propaganda about terror cells. They want us to believe that there's like terrorism lurking behind every tree and people are out to get us. So we wanted to take that concept and turn it on its head and be cells that are about freedom and love and peace and sustainability. And also at the same time, if you think about the cells in your body, each of the cells in your body is performing an important task. You wouldn't be what you are without each and every one of those pieces of you. So they're powerful, they're unique, and they're important all on their own, but collectively, they're also part of you and this bigger ecosystem. And that's what the goal of the cells is, right? So you create your first cell, try to get to 7, 8 people or whatever you can get to, start teaching each other skills, teaching each other knowledge. Maybe your freedom cell decides, hey, today we're all going to go out and build a community garden. Then people in your community start hearing about this concept. They decide they want to create their own cell, right? Or maybe after a while, once you got your core group, you decide everybody within the group turns around and starts a secondary group, maybe more localized, right? So in Houston, our first group, we were all kind of spread around the city. So if we needed help very quickly, it might take 30 minutes for our cell members to get there. So then the next step is look to your neighborhood. So then you have these 7 to 8 members, one group. Then each of them turns around and starts another group more localized to them. Then you end up with 7 to 8 groups of 7 to 8 people. You've got about 70 to 80 people spread around an area now who are independent, who are working on their own goals, but also can come together and form a larger network for bigger projects. I also think that this concept can be used potentially in the future to defend our communities. I did a video called Organizing Against Violent Cops, talking about freedom cells, and just as a journalist, I've witnessed a lot of crazy things. I've been tased 5 times myself in Standing Rock and hit with pepper spray and all kinds of things, and witnessed people being violently abused by agents of the state. And I've asked myself plenty of times, am I just going to stand there and film it? I mean, we've all seen Eric Garner die on camera. Filming it doesn't stop these things, and the cops are rarely held accountable. And I know I'm kind of getting to some uncomfortable stuff, but we really got to think about this. If we're going to talk about building intentional communities, building autonomous communities, and breaking away and opting out, at some point, they're probably not just going to let everybody exit. They probably would like to discourage that or stop that, right? Or maybe you raise your children in a different manner than the state prefers. Maybe your religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs or health practices are not what they want you to do, right? What happens when the CPS comes into your community and tries to take one of those kids? Or they find out you haven't been paying your taxes and they send one of the IRS agents to come take you? Or just some violent criminal on the street starts grabbing one of your friends? I encourage people to do role-playing, to have your freedom cell. One person be the angry, violent cop or whatever person. Grab one of the other persons. How do you respond in that situation? I've been in Ferguson, Boston bombing, Standing Rock, and other really intense situations. And if you go back and watch my reporting on Standing Rock, you can kind of hear me quietly saying to myself, stay heart-centered, because I'm sitting there watching people just get beat in the head, it's intense. And it's hard to know how to respond in those emotional times. I think freedom cells is a concept that can be helpful for that as well, that we can start to actually defend and protect our communities from any external forces that want to come in and try to harm us. So it can be an educational tool. It can be a defense measure. It can be practical for gardening, for all kinds of things. Really, I think it's an unlimited concept that is going to be dependent on your interests and your needs and your environment. What works in Houston might not work in your community because you have a different environment, different resources, and different people available. But the tool is there, and I believe then once we establish these groups, then you've got 7 to 8 people you can start doing alternative currencies with, start bartering with. Then there you go. You've got the beginning of a counter economy right there. And agorism and counter economics is not only about spending alternative money, it's about building counter institutions to the state. So the long-term goal, I believe that as this spreads, the freedom cells will become more specialized, and maybe certain individuals, their focus is on engineering, or they're an architect or something like that, right? The knowledge and the power is diffused among the group, but if we're going to build something, we'll probably lean on the guy who's got the architect experience, right? Everybody's still important, but we'll lean that way. I think the cells will start to become more specialized and actually start to build infrastructure in the future, because that's a question I get often. Well, what about the systems we have now? I'm not saying we just destroy them now and leave people helpless. I think it's up to those of us who want to be the entrepreneurs and who want to be proactive to start building them now, because I've got nieces and nephews and plenty of friends with kids that I care about, and I worry about the world that we're leaving them, not only environmentally, but just the state of the world, the state of the government, and I am determined to build something, to build an alternative. And if other people choose to stay where they are under control of governments, that is their freedom. I'm not trying to drag anybody anywhere they don't want to be, but I want there to be opportunities for other people who don't want to participate in those systems. And I think it's up to us to build those. We can't sit around waiting for everybody else to do this for us. And as I said in the beginning, it's not going to be easy. Going out and, talk to Steven. Steven's been doing this 25 years, building intentional communities, finding alternative ways to live. And it's not easy. It's difficult, and it's frustrating. And it's the most important part, as I think I got a couple minutes here. I mentioned relationships earlier. I think the most important part before any of these ideas are truly going to be effective, we need to build them. We need to start working now. But if we don't focus on the healing that needs to take place as well, this is why my message, the conscious resistance, holistic anarchism, it focuses on the individual healing as well. Because when I look at the world and I see the problems, I think that there truly are reflections of individual struggles that we have internally. Until we are willing to face ourselves, do some difficult introspection, shadow work as some people like to call it, then maybe we'll build these freedom cells. Maybe we'll all start joining the counter economy. We build the alternative infrastructure. But I think in a matter of time, maybe one generation or two, if we haven't done the internal healing, we're going to become the people we've been fighting. And I think that's what's happened every time before. People think, oh, we just got to behead the king, replace the person on the throne, and that'll fix things, right? And what happens? They become the people, right? Because then they decide, well, now I need to guard against anybody who's going to try to get rid of me. And it's just a cycle. I don't want a revolution, because revolution implies revolving, going in circles. We need to step out of that cycle. We need to evolve. As cliche as that sounds, it's what we need to do. And to do that, we need to work on ourselves. We need to focus on our own individual healing. I released a free book last week. It's called The Holistic Self-Assessment. It's a tool to help guide you through this, to look at your principles, to look at your habits and your goals. All of my books are downloadable for free at theconsciousresistance.com/books. I have my mailing list and text list here if anybody wants to come talk to me. I also have one copy of my second book called Finding Freedom in an Age of Confusion for anybody who wants to come claim this and give me a hug. And I think I've pretty much covered everything I can say. And what's up, brother? Good to see you again. I'll get the hug in just a moment. And I just want to say thank you guys for your time, for everybody who's given me your attention. It means a lot. If you didn't hear earlier, my name is Derrick Broze. I'm here throughout the weekend. I'd love to talk with you. I always end with a positive affirmation, and I want to do that again. I hope that the tools, the ideas, holistic anarchism, agorism, counter-economics, that these mean something to you, and look further into them. Check out my books if you like. Let's have conversations. Let's be proactive. That's what really matters. What we do when we start going home on Monday, wherever home is, that's when the real work happens. So enjoy your time here, but if we all go home and nothing changes, then nothing changes. So if you care about actually creating solutions, then we need to do some work. I'm happy to keep getting invited to places and to get paid to fly out and to get a little ego stroke when somebody wants to talk to me, but that's not why I got into this. I got into this to change the freaking world, and that's what I want to do. And I have to start with myself, and that's what we got to do. Thank you, guys. So if you repeat after me, if you feel inclined, I'm done, and thank you for your time. I am powerful. I am beautiful. All right, now let them hear you on this one. I am free. Thank you guys so much.